2024, I ran my first 10K from the Museum of the Future across Sheikh Zayed Road. In 2023, I took part in my first international debate tournament. In grade 9, I stood on this very stage and delivered my first TEDx speech. And in 2025, I published my first research paper. Now, all of you have taken the time to come listen to me give you my take on the topic, navigating new frontiers, whatever that means. And in approximately the past 20 seconds, I've touched upon that exact theme by telling you about my newest experiences. But how many of you really connected to that introduction? How many of you seated here today are truly thinking to yourselves, wow, those words have truly changed the way that I perceive life, my words, my actions, and their impact? Probably close to no one. I think it's safe to establish that simply doing things the way that we haven't done them before is not the key to unlocking the compass within. Because if that were the case, Scuderia Ferrari, Real Madrid, and their newest breakthrough signings would be having a much better time than they are right now. So once again, what is the key? Because here's another well-known fact. Less than 0.1% of human beings who have ever lived are documented to be in encyclopedic records. Now, I have approximately 10 minutes to speak to you, at the end of which you may or may not forget me. But this much is certain. If you do not create a dent in the universe that makes people know you for who you truly are, that radically changes the way that people perceive the world, their problems, their solutions, it is statistically almost certain that history will forget you. Now, like I said, I have about 10 minutes to make you remember me. So how do I do that? Well, I could start off by capturing your attention span through the lower half of this screen, which is a trick I'm sure you're familiar with if you're on TikTok. Or I could tell you that if it wasn't obvious from the 3-syllable surname, I'm from Mumbai, in the Indian state of Maharashtra. But if you're anything like me, you'll probably dislike the idea of personal anecdotes. I honestly can't stand it when people talk about themselves at hours on length without any clear direction, which is why I'm very self-conscious about doing the same thing. But I also realize that shying away from something that I've never really experimented with before is probably not the best idea, especially when your TED Talk is all about navigating new frontiers. So here we go. Now this story comes from the period between 2020 and 2022. At the time, a certain virus was being spread around, due to which, as you would know, all of our classes were being held online on Microsoft Teams. My routine during those days was quite simple. I would log on to classes with Instagram and YouTube open on the side. My goal was to completely ignore my classes as much as possible, so that I could switch between classes whenever I felt like taking a break. I would study at the last possible moment before my exams. I would play video games for 2 to 4 hours a day, and I would confine myself to scoring just an aggregate of 85%. I would occasionally try a new routine whenever exam season came near, but as long as I got that 85%, it didn't matter, I was done. Now, on hearing this, you'll probably have one of 3 reactions. Option A, an 85%, you really needed help. Option B, and this one you'll hear a lot every time we approach exam season. A piece of paper cannot decide my future. There's nothing wrong with an 85%. And option C, CBSE board examinations are literally in 2 weeks. Why are you telling us about your grade 6 marks? And I think this is the problem with how we perceive exploring new things. We look at innovation as some one-off journey with a fixed destination point. You find a problem, you create a solution, and then you stop. People look at exams as some periodic formality that the system has created to oppress you. Oh, I just need to survive this one physics exam, and after that, I can go off to slacking for the next 3 months. But when was the last time that you thought of innovation as a mentality? When was the last time that you thought of innovation as the driving force that gets you up from bed every morning, that makes you think, I need to have a purpose that changes the trajectory of every human being on this planet? When was the last time that you thought of disruption as your driving force? Because I can guarantee you this much. occasionally experimenting with some new routine, only to go back to the same old routine weeks later, makes you the unrestricted inhabitant of a very small box. What really changed things for me was radicalizing the way I looked at exams, or for that matter, any other event in my life. Stop looking at exams as a set of questions that are designed to make or break you, and start looking at them as a platform for learning. Your biggest competition should always be yourself. So look at exams as a platform for you to learn from your mistakes, to grow, to develop, and to beat yourself, to push yourself. Because I can promise you this much: when you do that, there is no stopping you. So to sum this all up, my idea of navigating new frontiers would be summarized in one word: creative disruption. The idea here is very simple. You simply take an old idea, something that already exists, and then you destroy it, which in turn paves the way for innovation and new solutions. You see, this word has its stem in the term creative destruction, which involves introducing radical new changes in markets by challenging the convention. Because think of it this way: if you can create a change that radically changes the way that you or I or the person next to you perceives the world, looks at problems, looks at solutions, then you have made the impact that will likely get you into the 0.1% of the population with the encyclopedia page. Now, in my opinion, creative disruption is just a combination of two factors: the application and the mentality. In fact, this topic is so broad that it can range from practically anything, from learning how to ride a bicycle to creating the iPhone. But if I were to wager a guess right now, most people in this audience know Steve Jobs, and not the person who you see cycling on a random morning walk. My point is, do something the world has never seen before, because those are the sort of people the world remembers. Now, to give you an example of a corporation that really aligns with this principle, to me, is Netflix. In fact, one of my favorite Netflix shows is one that everyone in this audience has almost certainly heard of, as long as we don't talk about the ending. Stranger Things. Now, after launching a $480 million show that contributed nearly $1.2 billion to the US economy, Netflix truly proved that with the right amount of innovation and large-scale investing, the concept of a TV show could be a global frenzy. But for Netflix, innovation just doesn't stop there. Over the years, they have consistently disrupted by funding live stream programs and sporting events, and launching movies and global hits like Suits, which convinced practically a whole generation, myself included, to take up law, because that man right there just makes it look that easy. And that is how Netflix went from being a mail-order service that delivered DVDs to homes to being a multi-billion-dollar franchise. It's by taking the financial risk wherever it's necessary, by daring to do that almost every household today has a Netflix subscription. Now, this change isn't just limited to big corporations. In fact, one of the best examples of a disruptive business mindset comes from a legend in a seemingly unrelated field, especially if you're a Manchester United fan. Not that there are many of those today. David Beckham. What's interesting about David Beckham is that if you go to his Wikipedia page, there is a whole section dedicated to football-related business activities. You see, in 2007, David Beckham went from playing at arguably the biggest club in the world to a small team in the United States of America called LA Galaxy. But for disruptive businessmen, their mindset doesn't end there. No, they don't settle for just settling for the convention. They're always on the lookout for more. So what he does is he puts a clause in his contract which states, "I'm a global superstar. I will bring so much popularity to your league. It's only fair that I have the option to, in the future, buy a team of my own." Fast forward to today. For the price of just $25 million, David Beckham now owns Inter Miami CF, which is currently valued at over $1 billion. And I think that we can all agree, regardless of whether you've taken science or commerce, a 40 times return on investment isn't that bad of a deal. In fact, you might also know Inter Miami CF as the club where a certain Argentinian football icon currently plays. And all of this is possible because one man thought differently when no one else could. So when it comes to this blueprint for disruption, I would say the first stage is finding the industry that is ripe for disruption. I think that the best way to do this is to really put yourself in the shoes of a consumer and think, what am I looking for? If this one new corporation suddenly gave me all the solutions to all the problems that I've been looking for, would it really be worth switching over my loyalty after years of allegiance to another company? Like I said, find a solution. Now, one more way to do that is to take your biggest advantage, your unique selling proposition, if you will, and exploit this against your competition's biggest disadvantage. I think that one of the best examples of this characteristic is right here in the UAE. Delivery services like Talabat and Kareem have for long been expensive, not marketed themselves properly, and frankly not done a great job of offering discounts. And that's when a new competitor disrupted the market. And it's one that I'm sure all of us are tired of hearing about on roads, billboards, and advertisements every single day. Keeta. When Keeta introduced low-cost, discount-focused deliveries, they took over the market share. And that is because they did what their competition didn't and exploited this, pressed this advantage through aggressive marketing. The last stage is being your own disruptor. A true sign of industrial dominance is when your company's biggest threat is itself. And I think this really ties back to what I spoke about before regarding disruption being a mentality, where trying out new ideas is a culture, not a task. Because when you achieve this stage, there is no such thing as going extinct. The fact of the matter is, if you don't innovate, your competition will do it for you. The only way to survive, the only constant, is to keep moving forward. That's about 10 minutes. I hope that I've done something different by speaking to all of you about the power of creative disruption. If you still remember what I've said at the end of these 10 minutes, hopefully it's because I've done something new. The question is, will you? Thank you so much.